Chapter 11. Thin morning sunlight came through the single porthole. Flash sat up on the rough wooden flooring and looked around. He was in a small cabin in some kind of ship, and the ship was moving along the river. He could feel that. Slumped on the floor just beneath the porthole was Tun, his mouth slightly open. He was snoring loudly. It says soaring loudly here. Oh well. There was no furniture in the room, nothing at all. Flash got himself upright. As he rubbed at the lump behind his ear, he said, "I didn't hear that one coming at all." He crossed, a bit unsteady, to the cabin's thick door. It was locked from the outside. "Good morning, comrade," said Tun, wakening, yawning. He stretched his arms up. His tail brushed at the floor. "I sincerely believe I could have beaten that trio of rascals, and with the help of a fine lad such as yourself, it should have been child's play." "There were more than 3, said Flash, grinning. "It was one of the extra ones who got the jump on me." The Lion Man was running his big hands over himself. "I don't even seem to have any welts and lumps than I did when I started. No, wait. Here's a nice fresh goose egg on my skull. Well, they put one over on Tun this time." With a grunt, he rose up off the floor. "That's who I am, Tun. My people are called the Lion Men, a proud and fierce race, as you've no doubt guessed." He held out his hand. Shaking it, Flash said, "I'm Flash Gordon." The Lion Man studied him for a moment. "I've not exactly seen your like before, Flash. Where are you from?" "From a planet called Earth," replied Flash. He explained his mission to Tun, told him of the crash of the survey ship, and of his subsequent search for Dr. Zarkov and Dale. "Another planet, eh?" Tun rubbed his knuckles over his tangled mane of yellow hair. "How do men live there? Is there more freedom?" "In some places," said Flash. "In my country at present." "Have you anyone like Ming the Merciless to contend with?" "Not right now." "I feel," said Tun, "as do all my people, that Ming must be stopped. Nay, not only stopped, but overthrown. He must conquer no further territories. He must be toppled from the rule of those he has already taken." "How many ways are there of doing that?" "One," answered the Lion Man. "Revolution?" "Aye." Tun nodded his shaggy head. "Ming, you see, has abolished all general elections and declared himself perpetual ruler of all Mongo. He has closed down the higher courts, making himself the final judge. There is still a parliament, but they are all his puppets and lackeys." "How did he come to power?" "There was a long period of depression and famine, much dissatisfaction. The old regime grew weak and Ming staged a coup. From then on, he has been in control of the capital," explained the Lion Man. "He has built up a huge and ruthless army, a monumental police force." "To bring off a revolution," said Flash, "you need several things, not the least of which is weapons. Aye, it is now a crime for any but Ming's minions to possess any sort of sophisticated weapon." Flash remembered his own blaster pistol. He felt under his tunic. The gun was gone. His rucksack had been taken from him as well. "Do you have any idea, Tun, who was holding us?" The Lion Man's tail flicked back and forth. "From the sluggish nature of our progress downriver, I'd guess we were on a barge. A good many of the great river bargemen transport things which are not strictly legal." "What do they have in mind for us?" "I fear we've been grabbed for the purpose of being taken, by way of one of the subsidiary rivers, to a disreputable port town. There we'll likely be sold to slavers." Flash nodded. "Are we traveling in the direction of the capital?" "Aye," said Tun, with a glance at the porthole. "Good," said Flash. "We'll have to see about escaping." Tun lowered his eyes, his tail curled around his leg. "I have to admit a fondness for green ale," he said. "Nothing wrong in that itself, save that it, in my unfortunate case, makes me even more talkative than I normally am. I'll give you a good piece of advice, Flash. Never get into a political discussion in a low waterfront dive. Or out in front of one. What I'm trying to say is I'm truly sorry an upstanding lad such as yourself got dragged into this mess simply because I couldn't control my tongue. The heavy door creaked open. The man on the threshold was incomplete. He had one leg missing, his left, and one arm gone, his right. He wore wide-bottomed trousers, a heavy coat with brass buttons running up the front in 2 rows. "You," he said, pointing at Flash, with his only hand. Flash watched the man, saying nothing. "Up above," said the incomplete man. "Somebody wants to see me on deck?" "Aye." He took a swaying step backwards. "Come along." "What about Tun?" asked Tun. "Have you no requests for my company?" The one-armed man flicked his wrist, and a long knife appeared in his hand. "Stay here." Flash stepped out of the cabin. "Who am I going to see?" "Captain." "About what?" "Business," the man answered. The road was dusty, cutting through dry, ruined fields. Already at this early hour the air was hot and the sun a glaring yellow. The hooves of their horses stirred up swirling spouts of dust. Zarkov wiped the back of his fist across his mouth. He, too, was now wearing a hooded robe. In the field to his right he noticed what he at first assumed was a scarecrow. Not an effective one, however, since a cluster of bright green crows were pecking at it, dancing on its arms and head. Then the doctor realized, it's a man. Riding beside him on a roan mare, Brother Anmar said, "Executed at Ming's orders." "For what reason?" "His crops failed," said Anmar, "as did many in this valley." "Do you know the reason for the failure?" "Oh, yes. The particular kind of war gas which Ming's airship dropped on the nearby towns and villages killed most of the growing things in this part of the territory." "Ming won't accept such an excuse?" "I imagine he does now," said Anmar. "There have been fewer executions of farmers of late. This man, as you no doubt noticed, has been dead several months." "Will no one cut him down from those poles?" "That would mean death for whoever did it," answered the blonde sorcerer. "If the royal police were unable to find the man who did it, they would pick one at random, and execute him." Smoothing his beard, brushing dust from it, Zarkov observed in a loud voice, "No way to run a planet." Up ahead, Brother Beltor looked back over his shoulder. "Perhaps you will be more willing to help us now." Zarkov's left eye narrowed, new wrinkles gathered on his forehead. "I'd like to see this Ming tossed out," he admitted. "Such is our objective," said Anmar. By the side of the road stood 2 naked boys. The tallest of the 2, who was about 7 years old, wore a dirty piece of cloth and a patch over his left eye. Each boy held a wooden bowl in his scratched, dirty hands. "Any food, any coins?" they asked. Brother Igon, who was in the lead, reined up. "You beg a long way from anything." He reached into the knapsack on his saddle. "We do not wish to risk the town today, sir," said the boy with an eye patch. Leaning down, Brother Beltor handed them 2 silver coins. "Why is that?" "5 men are to be hanged at midday," explained the other boy. "For what crime?" asked Igon. "Not for any crime, sir," said the boy. "Merely as an example to us all." "We have seen more than enough such examples," added the one-eyed boy. "Thus we have come away from the town today to try our luck here." "Well, here is some bread and cheese for you," said Igon. "Thank you, sir." The 5 horsemen rode on. Zarkov looked back twice at the thin, naked boys. After a few moments of silent riding, he said, "These public executions are held often?" "Very often," replied Anmar. "Each week oft-times, in many of our towns and villages. It is intended to keep the people docile and fearful of Ming. As you may imagine, it frequently has the opposite effect." "Are we traveling as far as the next town by horseback?" "Aye. We still have several miles to travel ere we reach the concealed airship, which is to carry us to the Forest Kingdom." "Will we reach the town before midday?" "We should." "Dressed as wandering conjurers," said the burling doctor. "We can pass through the town?" "Aye. As I explained last night, in many parts of our planet, there is still a belief in witchcraft and magic," said Anmar. "Even those who do not believe enjoy witnessing a few mystifying tricks now and again. Thus we pretend to be sorcerers, and so far, Ming has not harmed any of our ranks. We are able to move freely across the land, though should the Emperor learn the real identity of any of us, he would be swift to act. Doesn't anybody ever try to stop these executions? Zarkov asked. It would mean death for any who dared try. Zarkov rubbed his hand across his middle. Beneath his robe, his blaster was tucked in a pocket of his work suit. Anmar, putting him on his honor, had returned the weapon before they had begun their day's journey. Not necessarily, he said. What do you mean? Zarkov said nothing more. Chapter 12. The captain was crouched in the bow of the barge, with Flash's rucksack on the deck at his feet. He was a well-shouldered man with a scarlet kerchief tied around his head. Perhaps you and I can come to terms, which will prove satisfactory to both of us, he said in a low, throaty voice. Flash stood at the starboard rail, studying the countryside they were passing through. It was all thick foliage, growing right down to the river edge. Great twisted roots tangled in the water, splotched with a yellow-green moss. What do you have in mind? I don't wish to display this certain item out in the open here. Let's talk in your cabin, then. That's worse, said the captain. Whilst they can't always see what I am up to, they can hear better. No, this is the best spot for a confidential chat. He squatted down lower, tapping the rucksack with his knee. I put the one which was taken from you in here with the others. Too many have seen it as it is. Flash turned to face him. So you're interested in the guns? The man's weathered face puckered. Don't go bawling it about in the breeze, he cautioned. We must be careful. Such items are, as you well know, forbidden. Were I to be found with these, I'd be hanging by the neck in some public square before nightfall. Aye, it's a great risk that I'm taking. Maybe you ought to turn them over to the Royal Police. The captain's face grew more wrinkled. No, that is not exactly what I had in mind, he said. What I have been thinking on is this. How did you come by these items? Flash watched him for a few seconds. You'd like more, is that it? Aye. His head bobbed up and down. Even these 3, why, they would bring a fortune if I sold in the right place. Granted, I am no expert, yet they look to me to be of the highest craftsmanship. These seem far better than anything the Royal Police have. I imagine you represent some clandestine manufacturer. Flash said, Who would you sell them to? You must know the likely customers as well as I do, said the captain with a frown. You, a man who'd risk smuggling this kind of thing, must know exactly who is in the market for such merchandise. I'm interested in your views of the market. Well, sir, for the quickest money, I would go to the pirate bands to the south of here, the captain said thoughtfully, though they will not pay near as much as Prince Baron. Prince Baron, repeated Flash. He had heard Harn and the innkeeper talk of the man. Is it true that you can come by more of these? His knobby hand stroked the sack which held Flash's blaster pistols. Flash lowered himself until he was looking the captain in the eye. I'm not sure I can trust you. Ask any man on the river, said the captain, his voice rising. I have been a bargeman since I was a whey-faced lad. There's no man living who dares call Captain Norlag dishonest. Grinning, Flash said, Yet I have the notion you were planning to sell me to the slavers. Eh? Captain Norlag looked away, tucking at the knot of his headscarf. After clearing his throat, he leaned closer to Flash. I'll be completely frank with you, sir. I did intend, perhaps, to see what they would offer me for your companion. These are lean times. You must know, and Lion Men, despite their surly ways, are good workers. They usually fetch a handsome price. You, however, sir, I never considered selling to any. Are you planning to continue toward the capital? The captain hesitated. Well, yes, he said finally. We have a consignment to pick up 20 miles further down the river. Let me discuss the situation with my companion. Do you mean to tell me that Nappy Rogue is a partner of yours, sir? He has to be part of any deal I make with you, answered Flash. He'll help me decide whether the people I represent will wish to do business with you. Norlag said, Very well, so be it. How many of these, items do you think you might be able to provide me with? How many can you sell? He sucked in his breath. Are you saying, sir, there is no limit to the quantity? If I can get you one, I can get you a dozen. A dozen? May the gods bless me. Why, with a dozen of these, a man... He gave a throaty chuckle. Now as to price, said Flash. Well, sir, you must realize that I am to be taking all the risks. Suppose I were to offer you 20% of whatever I make. No, we usually get at least 60, said Flash. Though perhaps I can talk them into accepting 50%. 50? The captain slapped his rough hand against his forehead. You won't get weapons like this from anyone else on Mongo. After a few thoughtful snorts through his broad nose, the captain said, Very well, sir, we shall call it 50. Here is the hand of Captain Norlag on it. When Flash returned to the little cabin below deck, the Lion Man asked him, What transpired twixt you and our worthy captain? Flash said, I think if I can keep bluffing him for a while longer, we won't get sold to the slavers. There were banners flying in the town square, musicians in crimson cloaks playing festive tunes, vendors sold bright novelties, and there was even a little food to be had. But the people stood silent on the rose-colored cobblestones of the square. Thin, threadbare people. They made no pretense of enjoying themselves. Here and there a highly polished royal policeman laughed and joked, but none of that rang quite true. By a half hour before the scheduled time for the executions, even the police had grown silent. All around the high wooden gallows, silence reigned. Dr. Zarkov had a good view of everything. He was stretched out on the flat stone roof of a 2-story inn across the square from the wide scaffold. He was dressed again in his work suit, so as not to connect the sorcerers with what he planned to do. In his hand he held his pistol. Beside him, wearing now a farmer's guise, was Brother Anmar. I still have grave misgivings, he whispered. You can ride out and wait for me beyond the town, as the others have done, said Zarkov softly. When necessary, we could talk in whisper. No, when you outlined your idea, I told you I would help you, said Anmar, though I am beginning to regret having given you permission to try this. You are a very persuasive fellow, yet we don't want to lose a mind such as yours. I guarantee you, said Zarkov in a louder whisper, that I will be using my brain for quite a while to come. Ming said his bully boys aren't going to be dangling Zarkov at the end of a rope in the foreseeable future. He inched forward, frowning. Let's see now. They've got the prisoners in that gray stone building down there in the rear of the gallows. To the rear of the gallows. Yes, with 5 policemen guarding it on the outside. Zarkov shrugged. 3 in front and 2 in back, he said. So if we hit the back side of the place, we've got only 2 to worry about right off the bat. He scrutinized the town square further. They seem to have just 1 airship as far as I can tell. That's it there in the courtyard to the rear of the jailhouse. He rubbed at his bearded chin. Simplest thing is to put the ship out of commission. Could use it for the prisoners to get away in, but it might take too long for me to show them how to use the damn thing. You know how to operate a type of airship you've never seen before? Don't see why not, answered Zarkov. Now, where are their horses? Ah, yes, in the stable off to the side of the jailhouse. And what's that parked near the mouth of the street we want to use? A hay wagon, isn't it? Good. The doctor, in a low crouch, began working his way across the roof. He swung over the edge away from the square, let go, and dropped down to the second-floor balcony. The small balcony groaned when Zarkov's bulk hit it. He leaped from there to catch hold of a clay drain pipe. On the stones of the alley, he waited for Anmar to make a similar descent. Remind me to give you a list of exercises that'll limber you up, said Zarkov, when the sorcerer was beside him. 10 minutes a day, guaranteed to work. My schedule at present leaves little time for recreation, Anmar replied after catching his breath. Zarkov concealed his pistol again in a side pocket. Let's get going. Sticking to the alleys and side streets he'd checked out from above, the doctor led Anmar around to a position near the rear of the jailhouse. The street he'd chosen for an escape route was empty, most of its shops and houses closed up. Now for a small distraction. Zarkov withdrew a short, red, cylindrical object from another pocket. You get over behind the hay wagon, brother. When we come galloping by, you give it a hefty shove to block the road for a bit. We? Me and the prisoners, said Zarkov. Are you in good enough shape to get the wagon rolling? You've nothing to fear on that score. If I can't swipe an extra horse for you, you'll have to ride tandem with me. We shall see. So saying, Zarkov left the sorcerer to edge along the empty street. One of the police guards was leaning with his hips against the wrought iron stir rail which led up to the rear door of the jail. The other, hardly more than a boy, was pacing a few yards in front of the snub-nosed police airship. When the boy turned toward the other guard, Zarkov ran zigzagging for the ship. He made it and jumped up on the wing. The body of the ship hid him now from the two royal police. He lit the rescue flare he'd been clutching in his hand and tossed it beneath the ship. 10 seconds later, an enormous hissing began. Red and yellow sparks started to spurt out wildly from under the craft. "By all the gods!" exclaimed the young guard. "What's wrong?" He trotted up to the ship, tugged out his keys, and opened the cockpit door. "What should I turn off?" "Excuse me, young fellow." Zarkov gave him a careful chop to the neck, and the boy slumped. The nose of the ship still masked his doings. Shoving the unconscious guard up into the aircraft, Zarkov climbed in. After a swift survey of the controls, he said, "Simple. Extremely simple." He laughed, snapping his big fingers. We'll take care of a couple birds with this one stone." He activated the ship and ran it smack into the rear wall of the jail. The other guard, who'd been watching the ship and the profusion of sparks, was able to throw himself off the stairs just before impact. The blunt nose of the police ship made a sizable hole in the backside of the jailhouse. An instant after the crash, Zarkov was out of the aircraft and scurrying through the hole. A puzzled, wide-eyed sergeant, staring at the fresh debris and trying to put on his gold helmet, didn't notice Zarkov until the burly scientist was a foot in front of him. "What means—" Zarkov knocked him out. There was a ring with 24 keys on the man's belt. No time for that, decided Zarkov. He started down a corridor and located the cell area. "Stand back from the door, gents," he told the 5 prisoners. The blaster crackled. The cell door disappeared. "Okay," Zarkov told them. "Everybody out into the stable yard. Pick a mount and hightail it down the street. Head out of town." "Do you really think," asked one of the prisoners, "we have a chance to gain our freedom?" "I guarantee it," bellowed Zarkov. "Now get moving. I have to revive the sergeant and tell him a little something." Chapter 13. The attack came a few minutes after sunset. By day's end, the barge was moving through a swampy stretch of land. Mist rose up between the trunks of the dark trees on both sides of the narrowing river. There was only a deadly jungle silence outside. "I should never have left the hot, dry climate where we lion men are meant to live." Tun was looking through the porthole. "And wherefore did I, you may well ask. It was in order to attempt to raise... Hey!" Flash crossed to him. "What is it?" The shaggy man stuck his head further out into the growing darkness. His long tail swept to and fro. "Dark shapes in the water, coming toward this barge." "I don't see anything," said Flash, taking a look. "They're beneath the surface," said Tun. "Unless I'm much mistaken, we're about to be visited by..." "Mermen!" cried a voice up on the deck. Tun sprinted to the locked cabin door, hit against it with his shoulder. "I've encountered these devils before. A vicious lot, I can assure you." "They can breathe underwater?" "Aye," answered the Lion Man as he hit the door once again. "They live beneath the sea, and some tribes inhabit these wretched swamps. They oft-times raid ships and barges, seeking both plunder and sport. They are amphibians, and can live upon the land when they so wish." The door opened suddenly outward. Tun went hopping into a small stairway. Captain Norlag was huddled there. "We are beset with mermen." He held out Flash's pistol. "I cannot for the life of me fathom the working of this weapon. Can you show me? And hurry, sir, hurry." The agonized scream sounded on the foredeck. Thumping, splashing footsteps echoed. Flash took the pistol and then noticed that the captain had his rucksack strapped to his back. Without warning, he grabbed the captain by the neck, pulling him down the stairs. "I'll take my belongings back." Norlag stumbled and fell. Flash ripped the rucksack free, then heaved the captain into the prison cabin. "Slide the bolt," he told Tun. "Done. And now?" Flash flipped him one of the spare blaster pistols. "I'll show you how to work this thing." "We are to help these scoundrels repel the mermen?" Flash spun. A large, scaly shape was hurling itself down the stairwell at him. The merman was pale green in color, his muscular body covered with fine, glistening scales. His head was more reptilian than human, with a row of fluttering gills beneath each ear hole. His mouth was open in a snarl which revealed his sharp, narrow teeth. In his scaly right hand he held a dagger. Flash moved swiftly aside. The charging merman, splashing the foul-smelling swamp water which still clung to his body, thudded down to where Flash had been an instant earlier. "Drop the knife," Flash ordered, his gun trained on the merman. "Nay, fool!" The merman sprang for him. The gun crackled. Before the merman hit the floor again, the upper part of his body had disintegrated. "Aye!" exclaimed Tun, looking from the remains to the pistol in his own hand. "This is a powerful weapon indeed." Quickly, Flash showed him how to use the gun. "If we leave the barge," he asked, "can you guide me to the capital?" "That I can, though you still have well over 200 miles to go, my friend." "We'll take our leave now, then." "As good a time as any," agreed the Lion Man. "I've never thought a river barge the best mode of travel." Up on the deck were 5 more mermen fighting with the barge crew. As Flash and Tun emerged from the stairwell, the nearest merman was about to slit the throat of a young member of the crew. Shoving the blaster into his belt, the Lion Man leaped. He kicked the knife out of the scaly hand. He grabbed the startled green man, spun him once high above his head before flinging him over the port rail. "I'll save the gun for real emergencies." Tun was laughing a deep, chesty laugh. "Ah, and here's another slimy lad looking for trouble." Tun, in a great bounding step, reached another pair of combatants. Here, a merman had a stocky crewman pinned to the deck, a 2-pronged knife raised above his head. "Back into the ooze with you, my boy," roared the Lion Man, his tail flicking like a whip. He yanked the merman up by the throat. The merman, screaming in protest, went sailing high over the starboard rail. His flying body was finally lost in the thickening mist. "Stay back," warned Flash. A third scaly merman was stalking toward the laughing Lion Man. He dived at Tun's back, knife in hand. Flash thrust his blaster with his waistband. He leaped, caught hold of the man's shoulders. "You may as well join your friends," he said. He pulled the merman backwards, thrusting a knee into his spine. The green man twisted, slashing at Flash with his knife. Flash caught the knife hand, chopped the weapon out of it. He jerked the arm up behind the merman's back. Then he forced the man ahead of the rail and shoved him into the river. Before the splash sounded, a scaly arm went tight around Flash's neck, pulling him back with choking force. "Allow me to repay the favor," offered Tun. The pressure on Flash's throat ceased. He turned in time to see his scaly green attacker spinning away into the night. A moment later, there was a splash from the other side of the barge. "I do believe," laughed Tun, "that's the last of the mermen going into the water on his own and saving us the trouble." "Let's gather up a few supplies," said Flash, "and then follow his example." Something howled, far off in the gathering dusk. A warm wind came sweeping down out of the hills, making dry leaves and twigs skitter across rocks and chalky ground. The trees were twisted, standing in tangled clusters at each side of the road. The hoofbeats of their horses sounded loud in the twilight. "They will be safe enough where we sent them," Anmar was saying to Dr. Zarkov. An hour ago they had come to a crossroads, and the sorcerers and the freed prisoners had parted company. The 5 men who'd escaped hanging to ride on to a place of temporary sanctuary, and the scientists and Zarkov to climb into the hill country to rendezvous with a hidden air cruiser. Talking over his shoulder, Beltor said, "A highly successful escapade, Dr. Zarkov. I'm starting to fear, however, that Ming's police may punish the other citizens of that town. They may pick 5 more citizens and execute them." The burly scientist laughed, his laugh bouncing off the huge rocks and boulders they were climbing through. "I can guarantee you that won't happen," he said. It is the kind of vicious reprisal which would appeal to Ming, Anmar pointed out. How can you be so certain he won't simply order new executions? Because, said Zarkov, he's going to think the public killings came off exactly as planned. I only wish we had time to try this gimmick on our few other towns. Gimmick? Repeated Brother Anmar. A gimmick is some sort of stratagem? You bet it is. Zarkov hunched his broad shoulders, shifting a little in the saddle. Before I beat it out of the jailhouse. After I decked the royal cop, who came in through the front door to see what all the rumpus was about, I woke up the sergeant. He's in charge of the police in this town. Before I revived him, I made a small incision in his upper arm, and then covered it over with a bandage out of my gear. What exactly, asked Anmar, was the purpose of that? It wasn't too tough to convince him I was a powerful renegade scientist, continued Zarkov. After all, he could see what I'd done to his Bastille. So I didn't have any trouble making him believe I'd implanted a little something under his skin. What? I told him it was a tiny bomb, but powerful enough to blow him sky high, roared Zarkov. If he tries to remove it or it pokes too hard, it'll go off. And I persuaded him I could also detonate it from a distance by remote control. Which you would do unless he turned in a false report about the executions, asked Beltor. Right you are, answered the doctor. It should keep him from knocking off anyone else for a few weeks at least. After that, he may start to wonder if he wasn't conned by Zarkov. It should work at that, said Brother Beltor. The howling they'd heard earlier was repeated. It came from the growing darkness to their right, and a moment later from their left. They could see nothing in the darkening woods they were traveling through. What sort of animals are those? Asked Zarkov. Sounds something like the Canis lupus. There are animals about this part of the country, said Anmar. I told you before that many on Mongo still believe in witchcraft and magic. What is it they believe about these hills? They say there's a tribe of people dwelling here, said Anmar, who can change themselves into wolves.